Twitter has restricted another post from U.S. President Donald Trump about using force against protesters in Washington, D.C. Twitter users now need to click through to read Donald Trump's tweet. Message now contains a tag warning that it violated the platform's rules about abusive behavior, but will remain visible in the public's interest. Twitter has previously labeled Trump's comments as misleading and breaching standards on promoting violence. In late May, Twitter restricted one of the president's tweets, saying that it glorified violence. Restricted posts cannot be liked or replied to on Twitter. And joining us now for this news review is Richard Silverstein, journalist and commentator from Seattle, Washington, and Max Parry, independent researcher, joining us out of New York. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both here to the Bulletin. I guess we'll start there in Seattle with you, Mr. Richard Silverstein. Your thoughts on this continued row we seem to be seeing between Donald Trump and Twitter and other social media platforms for that matter?
Yeah, let's remember that Facebook as well took down a video that he had been promoting, and not just him, but his campaign and a number of other key people supporting Trump had been posting videos which were taken down due to copyright infringement. And this is not the first time that Twitter has put Trump's tweets behind a warning as well. In this case, it relates to protesters outside the White House who are trying to topple a statue of Andrew Jackson, one of our early presidents, who is guilty of sending the Cherokee Native Americans on a trail of tears in which thousands of them were killed by starvation when they were expelled from their homeland in North Carolina and sent to Oklahoma. They're called the Trail of Tears. So Andrew Jackson is a figure who some consider a hero and many consider a genocider who has committed acts of terrible deeds against Native Americans. So what Trump is doing is trying to defend Andrew Jackson and really trying to defend white supremacy in general, and threatening violence against the people taking down these statues is typical for him, being the bully that he is.
Thank you, Richard. And Max, I'd like to welcome you to the program. Mr. Max Parry joining us now. Now, Max, what do you, this whole row you see from the Twitter perspective, do you see objective vetting of content, or do you yourself see some kind of, I don't know, bipartisan favoritism in play here?
Well, first of all, restricting tweets that advocate violence or abuse is one thing, but I think caution really needs to be urged here, going anywhere beyond that point in regards to labeling information or social media posts as misleading, because we've already seen the consequences of this on Facebook, another platform, where they empowered the Atlantic Council, a think tank that they tapped, which is funded by NATO. It features Henry Kissinger on its board of directors. It's funded by many of the Gulf state governments. It's it also features intelligence high-ranking officials like Michael Hayden and Michael Chertoff. And the result of that was to start labeling media platforms, including this one that we're on right now, as of U.S. adversaries only, as state-controlled. And of course, the same is not applied to outlets like Al Jazeera or BBC or Western-friendly governments. So we've already seen the consequences of this, where these big tech giants being empowered to be the arbiters of truth and determining what is true and false or misleading information is extremely dangerous. And so we've already seen the harmful effects of that on Facebook. And to have Twitter follow in their footsteps, I think would just be even more dangerous, because there's supposed to be an alternative to that. on the one hand, the First Amendment only addresses the government's power to restrict speech. It doesn't address what these platforms can do as private companies. But when they are basically these all-powerful ways that people get information, they have a social responsibility at a certain point to protect the First Amendment. As far as Trump goes, I think it really plays into his favor, and it'll backfire because he's successfully portrayed himself as an outsider up against the establishment, and that's just going to further solidify that in the eyes of his supporters.
And Richard, I saw you shaking your head there for a second. What's that in reference to?
Well, I take a different perspective on this. I agree that censorship on social media is a bad thing in general, and that it can be used against progressives and people on the left like myself and others. And yes, it has harmed press TV as well. But I think that we need to draw a line, and U.S. jurisprudence has drawn a line and said that the First Amendment does not protect someone who shouts fire in a crowded theater. And I think when you have the President of the United States with tens of millions of followers threatening violence on protesters who are exercising their legitimate rights to speak, I think that's shouting fire in a crowded theater. The President has a huge platform and huge impact. And we see a lot of the white supremacist violence in New Mexico and in other places really is incited by Trump. So I think we need to be extremely careful about this issue. And I don't think that stopping Trump from goading people into violence is violating First Amendment rights. I do agree, though, that the social media platforms are not doing a very good job of policing their platforms for real dangerous content. And that's why I am in support of plans like the ones advocated by Elizabeth Warren when she was running for president, in which there needs to be more regulation of these social media platforms. They shouldn't, in the case of someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who really seems to be supportive in some way of white supremacy and seems to be willing to come down much harder on the left, on Palestinian rights groups and things like that. So I think that either there needs to be government regulation that has a more level playing field here, or somehow this needs to be taken out of the hands of the owners of these companies themselves, who make decisions based on profit rather than on real rights issues and values and ethics.
Thank you, Richard. And Max, we have about a minute and a half left. Go ahead, bud, and get the final word in.
Well, first of all, anyone who cites a bill being pushed by somebody like Elizabeth Warren and claims to be on the left is, I find, highly questionable. We've already know that the big tech giants will use the censorship of the far right as it's inevitably a pretext to always go after the left. And we've already seen this with the banning of InfoWars and David Icke and other people on the right. It inevitably becomes a pretext to go after outlets like Press TV and others, where, it's already a very minuscule allowed dissenting voice against American imperialism. And I mean, we've already seen how Facebook is working with the Israeli government to deplatform pro-Palestinian activists and accounts. So the idea that they're censoring Trump is not going to be a slippery slope towards going after progressive outlets is extremely naive in my view.
All right, gentlemen, time has gotten the better of us. I want to thank you both for joining us. Richard, always a pleasure to have you on. Richard Silverstein, that is, a journalist and commentator joining us from Seattle, Washington, and Mr. Max Parry, independent researcher, joining us out of New York. And viewers, that's a wrap for this segment of your Press TV's News Review. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.